I'd like to welcome everybody to this week's question and answer session with Top Shot Chris. My name is Marc Malonzo, and I work with Chris on the Google Apps support team. Thanks for being with us, Chris.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for moderating another fun Q&A session.
Always a pleasure. All right, so let's get to this week's episode. Let's see. So Terry's reaction to this week's gun. What was the name of the gun?
It is a Kentucky Flintlock pistol.
Okay. And I liked Terry's reaction to the gun. He said, "Where do you guys get these weapons outside of a museum?" What was your initial reaction to the gun selection for this week or last week's?
So at this point in the competition, we're getting ready for some sort of older weapon. Top Shot, historically is they run the gamut between modern and antique weapons, and so we had seen the Ruger Vaquero cowboy pistol, the BAR, modern shotguns, modern crossbow, and so we were ready for something older. I don't know if any of us were really expecting a flintlock pistol, but we weren't super shocked to see an older weapon appear. I think it was a mixture of sort of fear of the unknown, since all of us, with the exception of Gary, well, none of us had fired a flintlock pistol before. So it was very exciting to shoot something very foreign and new. I personally was very excited to see that.
And you said that you could see it being a very frustrating gun, especially on a battlefield. Do you think you'd survive if you were on a battlefield with that gun?
Yeah, wow. If I were on the battlefield with a flintlock pistol, I can imagine that part of the strategy would be finding cover while you're reloading, because to load that flintlock, it took anywhere from 20 to 30, 40 seconds just to load it up. And so, if you're sitting out in an open field, I don't know, you duck behind a dead body or a rock or some kind of ditch. But I imagine, and at least from what I've seen of old school warfare, it's out in just in an open field type thing. So I guess what I would have to say is, I don't know if I would I don't know if I would survive per se, but I would at least hit what I was aiming for.
Yeah. All right. So one question I had about the gun was, I noticed that everyone held their free hand kind of weird. Like you and a number of people were shooting kind of like that. What was that about?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, part of the rules of this challenge was you had to shoot one-handed, which is a sort of a typical scenario in competitive shooting. And so, there are a few different techniques. And so, some people just, if I'm right-handed, hold the pistol with my right hand and then put my support hand just on my chest. Other people you saw, maybe they put it in their pocket or they sort of tucked it in their waistband. The main idea behind that is to secure your support hand so it's not dangling around. Or another thing to keep in mind is, let's just say instead of like locking your thumb in or hooking your thumb in your waist, like let's say if you just sort of put your fist on your waist, if your hand happened to slip and just your hand drops, that could affect your body, You'd be dropping back a little bit, and then that could affect your aim, and especially with whether you're shooting a very precise or imprecise weapon, you want your body to be stable. So that's the idea behind different weak hand support positions, either chest or sort of just in your pocket or just straight down.
I guess kind of along those lines of shooting the gun, the trigger on this gun looked to be really hard, or at least several people kind of struggled with it. Like, how much pressure did it take to shoot this gun? Was it difficult as it seemed?
Yeah, the trigger pull on the Kentucky Flintlock was really, really, really tough. Probably something in the 10 to 14 pounds range. What I thought was really great to see during the practice session. So remember, red team, we didn't see the blue team practice sessions. So, when I saw the Flintlock episode on TV, it was really fun to see, how the blue team was faring with that trigger pull. And so what I loved was, Little John and others, had commented about the trigger pull, and in practice, in particular, he was talking about how, oh wow, that trigger pull is really hard, really heavy. But then we had Gabby, on the red team, who is, small-framed woman, but she had no, yes, like it was definitely a heavier trigger pull, but she didn't have any problems with it. And, Gabby, she just did such a great job of adapting, her style and her tactics to the weapon. It's sort of one of those things where you can't complain. Complaining isn't going to make you a better shooter. You just have to adapt. And, she loaded it up just fine. And as we saw in the team challenge, she nailed her target, and she was great in practice too.
Yeah. So I don't know. Just from what I saw, it looked like the entire red team did awesome during the practice. Was there a clear leader amongst you? Like, how did that turn out?
So yeah, Gary Shank was our clear, kind of expert on the red team. He's a Civil War reenactor and historical firearms collector, and he is also Garypedia. He knows so much about everything, in particular guns and weapons. And so Garypedia was by far and away the best with that Flintlock pistol. And that was no surprise, for the red team, knowing his background and expertise.
Who would you say was the second best, or were you all pretty much even?
Yeah, it was a pretty even playing field after that. I would say, Kyle and Chee and Gabby and me were probably just sort of, sort of in the middle. And Tim and Iggy were still, they were really good. But if I remember correctly, even in practice, Tim was having a little bit of trouble with the Flintlock. But we all were getting used to, especially that. I think the main thing is, besides the trigger squeeze, is the delay. So with the modern firearm, you pull the trigger, and there's just a very slight delay between when you feel the trigger give, the hammer comes down, right, and then then the cartridge goes off. In this black powder pistol, you squeeze, and then you've got this, flint, striking the frizzen and then igniting the gunpowder, and that black powder in the barrel igniting, it can be like a second delay. And so you have to really keep your hand steady. The follow through is really important. So once you've pulled the trigger, the follow through is you need to still continue standing still and keeping the pistol on target, and you can't move around. And so that was something that all of us were definitely having to get used to, and as well as hang fires. Gosh, I forget the difference, but basically sometimes you fire it, the ignition powder goes off, but the primary charge doesn't go off. So you just see this puff of smoke. Really? And then you're sitting there waiting, wondering, okay, is this going to be a longer than normal delay? But then sometimes nothing will happen. So then you have to reprime it and everything. So we actually had a few misfires and hang fires. I forget the difference, but they're basically malfunctions. So we had to learn how to work through that.
Okay, but they didn't show any of those on the any of the misfires on the show, did they?
No, they didn't show any of them, and there's only so many minutes, right, in any episode, so Bob made some sort of decision not to air it.
Okay, so I guess moving on to the team challenge, what were your first thoughts when you walked up and saw this pirate challenge that you had to do?
Yeah. So, walking up, remember that it's really hot. This is, August in LA. We're like out in the hills, and I was creeping up to triple-digit heat. So walking up there, seeing these like platforms and a rope swing, I'm really excited because even though I grew up in Orange County, which is like a bunch of like suburbs and stuff, my friends when we were growing up, we would go dig holes in like the undeveloped like tracks, and we'd build like bike ramps, and so we'd be like biking over these like pretty sizable ditches and stuff, and rope swings at like at the lake, like that kind of thing. So in a lot of ways for me it was like, all right, this is like a really fun kind of like childhood type activity, except with guns. The one thing I will say, though, about the challenge where I was a little disappointed, especially since it was pirate themed, I was a little disappointed that there wasn't any sort of water, or that the platforms themselves like weren't moving to like simulate being on a boat, something like that. But the main thing to kind of note here is that the flintlock pistols that we were using, the show rents them. And in this case, they rented them from the expert. So they were from his, personal, flintlock collection. And, imagine, right, if instead of sand, there was actually water, right. And like, right, Chee fell, 3 times and Iggy fell. And, right, imagine, right, they're sopping wet as they finally get to the platform, and, or what if the gun, accidentally like falls and drops in the water, right? This is like this guy's, personal, Kentucky Flintlock. So I imagine part of it was that. Part of it is also like it's triple-digit heat and like trying to truck out like that much water out there, and like. But anyways, so I was a little disappointed that there wasn't, some actual water. But all in all, like I was still excited to see a little bit more of a physical element. I think another thing to note was in season 3, there was a much heavier emphasis on physical challenges. And, at this point in season 4, like we haven't seen too much like, physical strength or size really coming into play yet. But so, we were all sort of expecting, all right, like when are they going to make us, carry like 200-pound logs or something as a team, and to see a challenge with some sort of physical aspect was exciting.
All right, on. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I didn't even think about like why you wouldn't want water around those guns. It's pretty cool. So blue team asked Gary and Kyle to sit out this round. Were you guys kind of expecting that one?
We were definitely expecting Gary to sit out. We had thought that, Kyle could possibly be chosen. We also thought Gabby might be up because she is an Olympic pistol shooter. However, we kind of thought that the blue team, was going to kind of harp a little bit about that trigger pull, and they would, might assume that, Gabby's smaller. She might also have a problem with that trigger pull. So we've kind of thought that, they probably won't pick Gabby, but they might. And then I think we had a little bit of thought that they might choose me, having done well at the shotgun and the crossbow challenge, but at this point in the competition, I'm still an X factor. To at least that was my sense. Like being amongst the blue team. Although I know the red team definitely. Was becoming aware that, hey, right, like I'm not just like a computer guy, like I can actually, shoot. But we've only had a handful of challenges yet, and so we were ready for Gary. So we weren't super surprised when Kyle was picked, but obviously Kyle was very surprised, when he was picked. I think he was probably hoping, right, that someone else would get chosen.
Yeah, he seemed a little let down.
Oh yeah, right. I mean, it's like I think anyone who gets sat out of a challenge, like you don't come on to Top Shot to get sat out. You want to be shooting, you want to be competing, and so I know he definitely wanted to participate.
Right on. So Team challenge starts, and she just did awful. Terry finished before Chee even made it across. Like, I mean, were you scared that this challenge was already lost at this point?
Yeah, there was, definitely. I can speak for myself that I was very, very concerned. We put Chee in that front position because he is one of our strongest shooters, and he's also in very good shape. We wanted to get our first shot off and get a point on the board, put the pressure on the blue team, and make them play catch up. And so in the planning, red team, we've done a really good job of planning and preparing for these challenges. But I have to say that this was one part where we fell very short, and we literally in our 5-minute planning session before the challenge, we did not talk about the rope very much at all. It was sort of an assumed fact that the rope's just this thing that we just need to do to get to the other side. But Chee had talked about how he wanted to get a running start, and we all said yes, that sounds like a good idea. And as you saw, or maybe if you didn't notice, the way that the rope was set up, that you couldn't be gripping too low on that rope, or else when you jump, you're going to drop down, and then you slam into that tower. So when it happened, when Chee hit the tower the first time, there was definitely a moment of panic and wow, because we hadn't planned for it, we hadn't talked about what do we do if we're having problems with the rope swing, and at that point things were moving so quickly that when she climbed back up the platform to go for a second swing, none of us had any time to really process, what went wrong with Chee's first swing. So when he jumped back up on the platform, we just handed in the rope, and he walked back again and did his running start and just slammed into the tower again, and that was oh crap, right? Yeah. This is a real problem. And finally, after third time slamming into the tower, me and a few others, right? If you watch the episode again, you hear us saying, go to the edge and hold up high on the rope to get across.
Yeah, that seemed to work a lot better.
Yeah.
So I guess having Gary on your team, even though he sat out, still seemed to be a pretty big advantage. How big of a difference do you think he made? I mean, obviously, he even helped you, because when you first got there, you picked up the gun just instinctively, but that wasn't the first move. So,
yeah, having Gary, walk us through each of those loading steps was very helpful. And while the blue team, they obviously beat us, they could have absolutely crushed us if they had someone on their side giving those same communication instructions. Because Little John, right, for this time around, it wasn't a nerves problem or stress, it was just you forgot to fully cock the weapon. And so if someone, whether it was Augie who eventually pointed it out, that could have really benefited the blue team. And so I guess back to the red team, wow, I mean, we came back, right? Little John Little John opened up that window of opportunity.
Yeah, Little John pulled a Little John.
Yeah. And we red team, we just could not capitalize on that. But just I guess to show how effective Gary was in the time that Little John was up there. Iggy went up, Gary helped him, load and fire, and also then helped Tim load and fire. And so that went by so quickly, that loading process. And so Gary was really critical in, giving the red team that opportunity, right? 2 chances, both, Iggy and Tim right there to play some catch up. But, obviously with the team, we have to rely on, everyone else to pull their weight and hit their targets.
Yeah, so right then when both Iggy and Tim missed and Little John is just standing there still, what was going through your mind? This was a chance to catch up, but then not?
I think, when Iggy missed, I was still very optimistic. But when Tim missed, because Greg, I think he hit shortly thereafter Tim had missed.
Yeah.
And, Augie's a great shot, and he was the last person to go on the blue team. And so, once Tim missed, I think the writing was on the wall at that point.
I think I'd be remiss if I didn't say one of the greatest lines ever was half-cocked at D-balled.
And this is one of the greatest things about, being able to see the show after it's all done, because, Dylan didn't talk about that line, that he said, in his little confessional. And right, we all said hours and hours of all sorts of things. But yeah, that was, I was at the bar with, a bunch of my friends, and we were all just dying when he said that line.
Yeah, same with our little watching party in South Bay. It was great. So you guys lost, and you had to go to the nomination range. One of the comments that she said kind of got to me. He said that Kyle is the head of the team, but Tim is the heart of the red team. What do you agree with that, or what are your thoughts on that whole situation?
Yeah, and I think that really summarizes, kind of a key dynamic about the red team is that, Kyle is our team leader, both in a strategic and tactical function. And Tim is really good at being that glue, the kind of the emotional side of things, making sure that, the red team members are that we're bonding, that that we feel comfortable around each other, and really, promoting a strong team unit and a team first, mentality. And not to say that Kyle, doesn't do those things, but you're right, it's just a great compliment, and goes to show, how team dynamics are not always simple, right? They're often very, very complex, and having that sort of big basket of skill sets, can really help a team shine or fall.
Yeah. So Tim and Eric were voted, but not Chee. Do you think Chee deserved to go, or do you think the two people that missed deserved to go?
Yeah. So, we in the elimination discussion, we definitely talked about Chee and the rope swing, and and Chee was, definitely wanting to, to go to elimination for that. And, it did, set us up, to be in a defensive, position where we're just, now we're having to play catch up with the blue team. But, ultimately, what wasn't aired in our discussion was, we asked ourselves, okay, do we think we're going to see another rope challenge, in a future challenge? Probably not. And so, because Chee hit his target, we put a higher value on his marksmanship skills versus his rope swinging skills. And so, and then Tim and Iggy, they clearly missed their targets. And, even though with, Chee, kind of delaying us, getting out of the gates, Iggy and Tim, if they had hit their shots, we would have won. So, at the end of the day, we decided, the shooters who missed their targets, should go to elimination. What's, interesting though about the show is, it wasn't, Chee didn't get any votes this week, but, maybe in a future, challenge, if the red team ends up, going back, someone might bring that back, and say, hey, Chee, that rope thing, or, for me too, it's hey, Chris, the first challenge with those plates, you didn't do so hot. So just the dynamics, are very interesting. So, I think we made the right decision voting on marksmanship.
So the elimination challenge was with the H&K 45. Have you ever shot that gun personally?
I haven't. So that was the first time, seeing it, and of course, with all weapons on Top Shot, I wish I could have, fired some rounds. But at least with this one, I can go rent it,
Right.
somewhere back at home. Unlike a grenade launcher or the BAR, like I don't have anywhere that I can just like go rent those.
Yeah. So they mentioned on the show that this was the first time ever on Top Shot where the shooter had to move their feet while targeting. What were your impressions of this challenge?
Yeah, that was definitely a very exciting part of this elimination challenge because, at least part of the way that I like to think about Top Shot is to, recreate historical shots, made throughout history, and from another perspective, to simulate real world sort of situations, and you're not always stationary, right, when you're shooting. Like I do some competitive shooting, and that's a lot of like shooting on the move, or if you're a police officer or military, right, like you're not always just like, you don't have a bench and you're not always shooting from a bench. You're, I don't know, running down a corridor, I don't know, chasing a suspect,
Iggy is a police officer, right?
Right. So yeah, Iggy is a police officer from Chicago, and then Tim is a big game hunter. So Tim, he's a rifle guy, and usually a stationary, right? He just sort of plants himself and shoots. But Iggy, on the other hand, right, he's trained in to move and shoot, in the urban environment.
All right. So after they go through the first time, it's a dead tie, which is pretty amazing. They use the same amount of shots, hit the same amount of targets. Did you think either one of them had an advantage going into the second round?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And so, I remember thinking to myself, wow, okay, well, they both got their first run at this. And so on Top Shot, it's really, really rare that these tie situations happen. And when they do happen, that you get to do it all over again. So, this was a great example of seeing, okay, who can adapt, learn from the mistakes that they made that first time around. I think at the time, I kind of gave Iggy a little bit of an edge because, this is his gun. I mean, he's a pistol guy, and he's a police officer who's, been trained to shoot and move, and, and Tim is just, he's a hunter. He's a big game hunter, and not really, trained to shoot and move, and he, was not a pistol guy. So, I'd kind of given Iggy a little bit of an edge, but I think, also on that note, the red team, though, we made it a clear point that, we weren't going to be like rooting for any like specific, members during like, if and when we made it to, we had to go to an elimination, that, if people for some reason liked one person more than the other, that, we wouldn't like favor people. So even though I gave Iggy, a little bit more, sort of an edge, it wasn't to say that like I wanted him to win more or I wanted him to lose. It was just more of a, like to the question, right? Do I think anyone, kind of had more of an advantage?
Right.
Yeah.
So were you shocked when Tim stepped up and just knocked it out of the park, getting 18?
That was so impressive. I mean, it was just so exciting just, when that his second run came around, and to just, see him just taking down jar after jar.
Right.
That is, I think what Top Shot's all about is just, seeing, just like really, really strong performances from people who aren't particularly, highly trained or, or like in love with a particular weapon, right? So for Tim, right, he's a rifle guy who just, kicked butt at a pistol. He really rose to the, really rose to the occasion and just crushed it.
Yeah, he did. Well, that's about all the questions I have about the episode.
Okay.
Open it up to, do you have any questions? Okay.
So during the elimination challenge, there's a lot of jugs out there, and you have to sit out in the heat while they reset everything. But how long does it take for them to reset an elimination challenge like that?
Yeah, good question. Let's see. So first of all, yes, it was very hot, and right, the rest of us were just sitting out there scorching. Luckily, there was production assistant or two that would like bring us. We had umbrellas and water and stuff while we could so we could hydrate. But yeah, they're very meticulous about resetting that challenge, and luckily they had like extra jars already pre-filled with whatever goop stuff that they had in there. Yeah, but it probably took like 45 minutes for them to and that was just to reset it okay, so for each person, it probably took them about 15-20 minutes to reset, right? And then Tim shot first, right? Then we have to wait for them to reset it again, and then then Iggy went. So yeah, in total, probably 40 to 45 minutes of just sitting there waiting.
I'm surprised they didn't run out of jars.
Well, who knows what would have happened if they had to run through it a third time?
Yeah.
I have no idea whether they prepared for that.
Okay, so going to questions online. Let's see. Jim from Mountain View asks, your teammates appear surprised when you kick butt during competitions. I was surprised seeing who couldn't handle a rope. What is going on off camera that creates this impression? Are we just watching gimmicky editing?
So, I don't think that it's not gimmicky editing. Part of, I think, the persona that I wanted to make for myself is that, I am just like the self-taught amateur, and, I don't have any awards or credentials to really speak of, and I really wanted to, create this underdog sort of, not even so much an X factor, because X factors can be scary, but just sort of the underdog where, right, people will root for the underdog, but, the underdog may or may not be that good. So, when I was, in back of the house or when we're all interacting, I can't really talk about, like, my shooting capabilities that much just because, like, I don't have a ton to talk about other than like, well, I like to go target shooting and, but I mean, in comparison, Gabby, she went to the Pan American Games, she, shot in the Olympics, and she's like put in thousands and thousands of hours of practice in, and, she can talk shop about all the, pistol pieces, and same with William Bethards on the blue team. He was also a competitive shooter, and and he's an FBI training specialist. He trains every single FBI special agent that comes through Quantico, and so what we're seeing, everyone being surprised, like when I have done well, it's because they weren't expecting me to, and that's the sort of the great part about Top Shot, right? Is you don't have to be military or like law enforcement to like do well in these challenges. It's just really about applying basic fundamentals of marksmanship and being adaptable and flexible in unfamiliar stressful situations.
Brant, sorry, asks, since the first episode where you famously had the never-ending revolver duel, which you went on to win, you've hit every single shot you've made in competition. No question, just wanted to say that you've been kicking some serious butt.
All right, well, thanks, Brant. Appreciate it. Brant and I went to high school together back in Orange County.
So, all right, Aaron from North Carolina says, the Star Trek red shirt line of jokes seems so obvious to me, yet we've never seen any on the air. Was that line of humor tried out in person, or is it just not a sufficient Trekkie shooter crossover for anyone to bother? Actually, the second highest voted question.
Fun. So yeah, I think with at least who the people who were cast for season 4, I don't think anyone had a very strong Star Trek background. I don't. And so, yeah, I don't know how many people, I don't know how many people in the shooting community like have that Star Trek shooting crossover, but if you've got it, I don't know. Yeah, it sounds like there could be a lot of good jokes from it.
All right, let's. Victoria from Denver says, Chris, who comes up with those custom cheers for each challenge for the red team? The skeet one was my favorite so far.
I love that that Victoria noticed, right, in every single challenge, the red team, we've got some sort of like customized, right, we've all got our hands and we go red team and then, grenade launcher, boom, or whatnot. So it's just a group effort, before every cheer we would say, okay, yeah, what could we do? And some people would throw some ideas out there and we'd like try it once or twice, and if it didn't work, we would just keep doing it until it sort of felt right. But I mean, we'd only do it like maybe 2 or 3 times, like tops. Right? We would just more verbalize and talk it out, and then just do it.
Nice.
Yeah.
So Aaron asked another question. I think this one we didn't get to last week, but how many of the red shirts did they give you? How much time was spent doing laundry? Do you run small loads yourself or coordinate and run a few large loads with other people?
This is an absolute critical question to winning Top Shot is right having clean shirts. So we each got 3 shirts, and they're like polyester. I think they're just like some kind of like polyester blend. They actually keep us quite cool in the heat, which is really nice. So yeah, we got 3 shirts each, and it synced really nicely with the 3-day cycles, right, for each episode. So just sort of depends on what happened to your team that week, like, right, because if your team wins the challenge, then you basically don't need to suit up on day 3 because your team has just a day off. Unless a producer needs to like pull you away for an interview, then you would need to like throw your shirt on. But it's like an hour type interview, so you're not like dirtying your shirt necessarily. But yeah, it was a mix. Like sometimes like I had enough laundry where I would just throw all my shirts in and do do my own red shirts. Other times, yeah, we would kind of have a group sort of like t-shirt washing load.
You didn't wash any red shirts with any blue shirts, did you?
No. Yeah, they were definitely
draw the line somewhere.
Exactly, definitely kept them separate. And it was funny, as much downtime as we had, the laundry, we had a washer dryer in the house, but it was busy most of the time, so that's where we're doing like a group wash would be helpful oftentimes.
One more question from the door. It says, Patsy from here, right, building 1300. How hard was the rope swing? I guess you personally.
For me, I thought the rope swing was really easy. Now, granted, I was able to learn from everything that Chee had tried, and got to see Gabby go, and so I think for me it helps to kind of have some time to visualize myself and to really make sure that I know, okay, well, and not just with the rope swing, but like loading the pistol. I mean, that was, I think, most of our focus was just trying to remember the steps and have Gary be a very essential aid in that process. But yeah, the rope was fine. Yeah, I don't know, it was fun. I almost wish it was like it had been like higher or like farther distance across.
An alligator pit underneath.
Yeah.
I lied. We had one more question from your friend Rhett from the Top Shot group. It's a little long, but it's a good one. It says, Chris, so far you've been presented as well-spoken, even-tempered, and intelligent. You seem to be the producer's go-to cast member for expository interstitials, and the other cast members have been uniformly glowing in their on-camera praise of you. To what extent were you aware of how the producers might try to present you during the filming? Were you ever asked to play up certain conflicts or badmouth other contestants to create drama? And how conscious were you of your image and your interactions with the camera and other cast members? In short, how was your behavior influenced? Or how was your behavior influenced, were you, by a lifetime of watching reality TV and previous seasons of Top Shot? That's why I emailed the question. Question exceeded the length.
Exactly, yeah. Thanks, Rhett, for the question that grossly exceeded the limit of Google Moderator. Let me see if I can deconstruct the question and answer it. First of all, I have to point out that I appreciate the, even intelligent part, I think, of the first the first piece. So, it's definitely something I was, hoping to have come across. But the thing that I loved best about Top Shot was everything that happened was very organic, and there was minimal interference by behind-the-scenes producers or like camera people or anything like that. And so, none of us were ever coerced or heavily suggested to say certain things, or they didn't have any like information bombs where they'd producer would be like, hey Chris, Tim said something poorly about you in his interview, what do you think about that? None of that happened. Like anything that was like said off in these that's where they're not really confessionals, like in the traditional sense. Right. Where these confessionals, like on like The Real World and the other like reality TV shows, it's like those confessionals, like that information gets piped right to other people to create drama and conflict. But I loved how it was very organic, and they, everything that happened, was really what happened. Now, to another part of Rhett's question, I was really aware of, how, the things that I was saying, the things that I was doing, and, thinking about, okay, how could a producer like maybe even tie certain things together, and I want to try and prevent that from happening if I didn't want that to happen. It is obviously much harder to do that, because, right, I mean, the magic of video editing, right, you can, splice things together. But that's another great thing about Top Shot, is I feel like, yes, they're obviously very selective in what segments they're choosing to show of each of us, but it's all true, right? It's like we said that or we did it. I think, what is, the thing to keep in mind is obviously we're all multifaceted, and there's more to all of us than what we're seeing on TV. In last week's Q&A, somebody was asking about Little John, and this is a kind of a frequent question, right? Is, Little John really like that, in real life? It's like, well, there's more to him, right, than just what we're seeing on TV.
I think that's one of the things I like about the show, is it's mostly about the competition.
Right.
And there's no drama. It's just, I mean, it's a reality TV show, but the focus is on the competition.
Right. And, they tend to, highlight the drama if it affects the competition, right? If it's going to affect sort of the nomination choices, they'll play up the drama a little bit. And, I think sort of the biggest criticism that Top Shot probably gets is, right, there's, in the small amount of drama that I think the amount of drama is very small, but sort of like the hardcore fans think even that's too much. And, some fans say, oh, like they should move to a completely performance, based sort of elimination system, and just basically get rid of the whole nomination range piece, which is an interesting thought. It'd be kind of, it'd be interesting to see like how that would play out. Did I answer everything in the question, or?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, good.
Did anyone on VC have any questions? Last chance? Or remain silent? Anybody here have any other questions? No?
So it seemed like you guys had figured out who you're going to put up for elimination when you got to the range, but do you decide ahead of time who's going to shoot whose target, or you just kind of hope that it balances out in the end? Like, is it you want to make sure that no one takes it personally, or?
Yeah, great question. So, for the red team, we, decided, right, Tim and Iggy were going to go to elimination. And we don't find out the shooting order until Colby just, says, hey, whoever, you're first. And so, we always said, in this elimination voting round and then in the grenade launcher one, whoever's the first person to go up, we just designate, right? Just shoot Kyle's target first, and then we'll just alternate from there. And that way, right, and to your point, right, we all said, hey, right, this is nothing personal. It's right. Everyone knows this is just the way the alternating, shooting is going to go.
All right, right on. I just have to say, tonight's episode, cannons, amazing. I wish it was now.
Yeah, the biggest weapon to ever be on Top Shot. And let me tell you, it's going to be one for the books.
Awesome.
Yeah, so.
Can't wait. Well, thanks for coming and telling us all the inside stuff.
Great. Thanks as always. See ya, I guess, Thursday for episode 6 Q&A. Alrighty.